Cormac McCarthy wrote a wonderful book called All the Pretty Horses, which won the Pulitzer Prize. One of America's finest novelists. In it, he talks about something that happened in the 19th century. It was pretty common. Cowboys often crossed the Rio Grande going south to get better jobs in Mexico, something we just can't think of today because the reverse is what's going on now. But when somebody needs a job and somebody's starving, they'll do whatever they have to do. One of the guys that did this for real was named Badger Clark. Charles Badger Clark was born in South Dakota and raised there. He lived in Deadwood for part of his life, and he claimed that he thinks that he got tuberculosis when he was living in Deadwood from the coal dust to the way they heated houses and saloons in those days. And of course, tuberculosis was, also a disease that you contracted from other people, but it was really complicated by the way that they had this dry heat in these houses and other public buildings. He had to do something to get away from the cold climate, the cold, dry heat, all these different conditions that he had to deal with. So he went down to Arizona, and as a young man, he became a cowboy right on the Arizona border. And he was one of those cowboys who went across the border to get a better job. In Spanish as a Loving Tongue, or as he titled it, Border Affair, he describes his own experience. Just like the plot of the novel that Cormac McCarthy wrote, while he's down there, he falls in love with a beautiful senorita. Now remember, in that time, there was a color line between brown and white just as much as a color line that survived later into the 1960s for whites marrying blacks in the South. So you can imagine what a Mexican father who had maybe almost royal Spanish bloodline owning a million-acre ranch thought when some drifting cowboy from America came down there and fell in love with his daughter. It didn't go very well. It doesn't go very well in the novel, and it didn't go very well for Badger Clark either. Badger had to leave primarily because of political upheaval. Americans were hated even more during the era of Pancho Villa, and that's when he had to leave. You either fought for Pancho Villa or you left the territory where he was. This is in Sonora, Mexico. After he crossed the border, he went back to South Dakota, having pretty much dealt with his tuberculosis, which never came back. He went back and lived in the area that we now call Custer State Park. And he had a little cabin there in the Black Hills. And for 30 years, he sat there and wrote songs and poems about his Western experiences as a young cowboy. He is probably the first widely published, really popular cowboy poet. And when I say widely published, it certainly wasn't popular in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, and San Francisco. But the Midwesterners and the Westerners really loved his work. His classic, Spanish as a Loving Tongue, or Border Affair, was recorded by many, many recording artists prior to the singing cowboy era of Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and so forth. And those guys, oddly enough, never recorded it. Maybe that's because of the politically correct factor where they didn't want to talk about an interracial marriage or an interracial love affair, because those guys had to deal with that in their time in the 1950s, 1960s, when this was a very hot issue. So it's made a big resurgence. The first time I heard it, Ian Tyson performed it when he was in Ian and Sylvia, and I was in college. First time I heard this song, it really struck a chord with me. It's a poignant song about somebody having to leave behind a true love. Badger Clark never married. He remained a bachelor for his entire life. She must have been a beautiful woman. She must have really been something. She was probably a teenager, and as an old man, he remembered her in that way. In the song, he also describes a traditional European-style courtship which survived in Mexico up until fairly recently, where an old madre or a chaperone had to be around while you're recording in the patio. And he describes this scene in the song. He never got over this lady, and today you can visit that Badger Clark cabin. It's still standing. It never burned down, was never torn down. The state of South Dakota has done a wonderful job of restoring it and keeping it as a historical landmark. Probably the most hair-raising experience in my musical career was getting to sit on the front porch of Badger Clark's cabin, and while the wind was blowing through the pines, sing Spanish is a Loving Tongue, just as I know he did so many times right there on that porch for visitors who came through Custer State Park.
Spanish is the loving tongue, soft as springtime, light as spray. There was a girl I learned it from, living down Sonora way. Now I don't look much like a lover, yet I say her love words over late at night when I'm all alone. Mi amor, mi corazón. And there were nights when I would ride, she would listen for my spurs, flame that big door open wide, raise those laughing eyes of hers, and how those hours would get to flying. Pretty soon you hear her crying, please don't leave me all alone. Mi amor, mi corazón. One time I had to fly, got myself into a foolish gambling fight. I had to say a swift goodbye, in that black unlucky night. And came traveling north. Her words kept ringing in every hoofbeat. I could hear her saying, please don't leave me all alone. Mi amor, mi corazón. I've never seen her since that night. I can't cross you know. She is Mexican and I am white. Like as not, it's better so. And yet I've always sort of missed her since that very first night I kissed her. I left her heart, lost my own. Adios, mi corazón.